It will be on my docket of things to do. All right, let's kick this thing off. I'm gonna get rid of my screen share here. We don't need that anymore. Or not my video share. There we go. Cool. Okay, yeah, let's just get going. So right now we're in manage mode, but we're gonna quickly exit manage mode because we want to edit a photo today. So like I said earlier, this video I'm gonna do slightly differently than I've done in the past. And the reason why is because in edit mode, there's so many things going on. And if you're truly new to the mode, there are some core fundamental things that we want to really get across in this mode. And I'm just worried that, so I'm going to sort of take aspects out of this that I don't think we need. And for the purpose of this, I think what we want to do is sort of remove a bit of visual clutter to do so. So I'm going to select a photo and we're going to go into edit mode. So I'll just pop up to the very top here and just open this walk along beach image in edit mode. Awesome. So let's try this. I would like to draw attention to the sections that I'm actually going to be talking about today. And that section, obviously the main purpose of edit mode is that it is a layered editor, which is different than that of develop mode. Because if you just wanted to develop a raw image, right? You just do it in develop mode. If you want to just manage your files, you do it in manage mode. But in edit mode, we're creating a layered editor. We're editing similar to how you would in like a Photoshop or some sort of, creative graphic tool. And that's what this mode is for. So let's just sort of go over what you see when you enter the product or when you enter edit mode specifically. Well, obviously, like all the modes, we still have our functional modes up at the top right-hand corner, which we can sort of navigate and switch to. On the left side, we have something that I like to call the menu bar. And there's a couple tools in the menu bar that we're not going to focus on, and there's a bunch of tools that we will focus on. So we'll get to that. But that's sort of the menu bar, or in this case, the toolbar. There's a lot of things that we use very regularly within this mode, or at least I use very regularly within this mode, and we're going to cover those things. The filter menu takes up a lot of real estate within edit mode, but for the purpose of this video, we're actually not going to cover any of it because a lot of these tools that we see here are non-destructively available just in these little buttons down here. I'll explain the difference to that because that might seem a little bit contradictory, but the filter menu tools themselves within edit mode are really intuitive tools to use. What they are, though, is they can be destructive tools versus these adjustment layers, which we see down at the bottom, all of which are completely non-destructive. So we're going to focus on the non-destructive tools and leave the filter menu for another conversation, another day's tutorial, because the filter menu is super useful within this tool, within edit mode. But I just, for purpose of complexity's sake, I'd rather leave those out for now because it adds another layer of complexity to that of this mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide this menu so we can get a bit more visual real estate within our menu, and we'll talk about those things. So like I said, we have the main toolbar, we have the filter menu, which we just collapsed. On the right, we have the color panel, the layer panel. So the layer panel is just right here where it indicates, layer 1, or if we had layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5. And then below it, we have the adjustment layers. Talked about in the filter menu, there are physical changes to the image, right? So if I wanted to make a vibrance change to our image, to change the hue or whatever, that would happen from within this panel. If I wanted to adjust the levels, right? Adjust the midtones, I would do that from within this panel. If I wanted to, apply a skin tone effect to a portrait, I would do that from this panel. If I want to add a vignette, I would do that from this panel, okay? So that section is sort of where we make these visual adjustments to our image, but that's not the sole area where these adjustments, we have a lot of ways to make really interesting adjustments within this mode that don't even ever use adjustment layers, but they will use layers. So we'll get to that. So we're going to talk about the layer panel. We're going to talk about obviously adjustment layers. And we're going to talk about our layer tools, which is just this bar, a bar that exists underneath this section right here. And we'll probably talk about this film strip as well, but for the purpose of this video too, I think I might just close and open this when needed. So we'll just set that one aside as well. So yeah, so I just kind of want to draw attention, visual attention to the areas that we're using. And I want to sort of hide for this time being, or just move away the areas that we won't be covering as much. Now, before I now that we've sort of gotten out of the intro and we sort of are entering into the actual meat of this this workshop, I'll just reiterate, you know, if you have any questions during this this workshop, please fire them off in the Q&A panel, and I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. And if I don't have an answer, I'll get back to you, or rather, I'll give you my email. Actually, I should do that right now. It's aprice@acdsystems.com. And if you have any questions, you send me an email and I'll get back to you there. Oftentimes what I'll do is some people have some more in-depth questions and I'll have to ask our developers. These are the people that, like, you know, they're right across the hall from me. You know, if you have a question or a comment or even like a criticism or Sue asked, will any of this video be about the organization features of ACDSee? This video will not cover any of those. Those were covered in a previous workshop. One, which, Sue, I can and will be uploading to our YouTube channel within the next couple days, if not today. So you can watch it there. But no, this will not cover any of those things. Right, so if you have any questions outside of what I can answer, send me an email and I'll get back to you, or I'll get our developers to get back to you. So let's go into this, right? So like I said, edit mode is it's a layered editor. What does that mean? Well, in the case of ACDSee, right, it means the ability to sort of stack layers on top of one another to create a very functionally interesting looking composite image, an image that is composed of multiple different layers, multiple different images. So when we are looking at the layer panel, what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to drag a second layer onto our layer panel. And then we're going to work with sort of two layers, and we're going to show you how these layers interact with one another. So one of the things, if you're new to ACDSee and you've popped into edit mode, one of the things you might not understand is that you can sort of stack layers among one another. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this secondary layer from this film strip that, like I said, we're going to use kind of sparsely in this video. I'm actually going to click it and drag it onto my layer panel just above my layer 1. So it places it on the file just above our layer 1 and allows us to sort of combine these two layers together. Now you'll notice that when it pops up on my page, it sort of pops up in the middle here, and I'm getting this indication that I need to physically move the layer. So what that means is I can physically move it across my panel. Now this is interesting because in this case, this image appears functionally larger than my original image, which means that it has like a higher resolution than my first image does. So I'm just going to take this image and I'm going to shrink it down to be about the same size as my artboard. You'll notice that I'm clicking on these little yellow corner indicators that allow me to change the size of this secondary image. So I'm just going to reduce the size of that and place it right there. What I can also do within this mode is when I'm placing an image, right? When I'm moving an image like this, I can also rotate it as well, right? Like I can hold down this rotation tool. And you can also hold shift while in this section to just move it in very structured 45-degree increments. So you can physically move by just clicking and dragging on the image to the place where you want it in your, where you want it. And then you can actually rotate the image as well. You'll notice that if I physically look up at this top bar here, this toolbar, this menu bar, you'll notice that we're actually currently actively in one of the tools, and that's of course the move tool, which is the second tool you see at the top left-hand corner here. Whenever you're moving an image, what it asks of you is, or whenever you've placed an image in this case as well, right? It asks you to commit the layer. Meaning like right now I'm sort of still deciding where the layer is going, you know, but I need to actually finalize that action. And I do so by either committing or discarding the image. Discard will just place it how it was originally placed when I went to, add this image to my layer panel. And when I did that, it came off as like a much bigger image because the resolution was higher than my layer 1. So we don't want to do that. Now that we've resized it, we simply want to commit the image. So what interaction just took place there? It was a pretty simple one. All it was a click and drag of one of these sub-images within our film strip located just at the bottom of our user interface here. And I dragged it onto layer 2. And sorry, I dragged it on rather above layer 1, and it was placed as layer 2. And then it was just simply while I was still moving the object, right, like this. Notice how I just clicked the move, it brought up those boundary boxes again. It allows me to then commit the image again. So I could have replaced it or whatever. So super simple interaction. But what is that resulted in? And before I show you how you move and interact with layers on the layer panel here, what I'm going to just quickly do, and I'll explain this, I'm just going to add a blank layer. So we have a couple different layers to see and see how they interact together as we stack these layers. I'm just going to add a blank layer, and I'll be explaining this in a bit, so we don't need to spend too much time on it. And I'm just going to, I don't know, well, let's say add a green fill to this blank layer. There we go. Cool. I'm just going to make this slightly transparent so we can, cool. All of this will be explained in a bit. But I just want to illustrate now that on our layer panel, looking back on our layer panel, right, we have these 3 layers. That's all that matters. We have our layer 1, which was the layer that we opened. We have our layer 2, which is the layer that we clicked and dragged onto our layer panel. I guess while we're talking about that too, we can hide this film strip by clicking the hide button. So we don't need to see it anymore. And then we just have a layer 3, which in this case was a blank layer that all we did to it was fill it with the color green. So you'll notice that as I click and drag these layers to the top, they take visual precedence over one another. Meaning like if I drag this layer 2 above our layer 3, now we see it, but we don't see anything beneath it. If I drag this layer 1 above our layer 2, I see it, but I don't see anything beneath it. And if I click and drag this layer 3 above my layer 1, I see it. However, it has been multiplied, blended with the layer that exists beneath it, which we'll also explain as well. But the point is that layers take priority over one another. What is at the top of the layer panel is taking priority of what appears beneath it. So in this case, if we hide our layer 1, which is this little button that appears right next to the layer 1, what will we see when we hide it? Well, we'll see the layer that appears just beneath it, which is layer 2 in this case. And if I move layer 2 above layer 1, we'll see it. But if I hide layer 2, what we will see then is just the green layer. So by stacking these layers in order, they take visual precedence over one another. There's some things that can change that visual precedence, one of which, as we talked about before, was blending an image or using opacity and reducing opacity. Another which is masking images, which we'll talk about. So layer order matters in ACDSee. Where you place a layer in your layer panel will have an effect on the end game result, the end of your image, the sort of the final iteration of it. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that as I'm operating with these layers, we understand what's going on. We understand why we're seeing one layer over another. So that's sort of layer order matters in a nutshell. We'll talk about multiplication. We'll talk about blending. We'll talk about masking as we go through. So let's talk now about the layer tools. So we very, very briefly touched on them in the intro, and they exist just beneath the adjustment layers. We've already used one of them, which is that add a blank layer. So there's a bunch down at the bottom here, and they all serve a pretty specific purpose. You'll notice that when we went to go drag and drop our layer 2 from our film strip, we did so just by, like I said, just clicking and sort of dragging it above our layer 1. But there's another way to add external images to our layer panel. That's the first button on our list here. It's just called Add a File as a Layer. So if I click this, it just brings me to a sort of a dialog box that allows me to search and look for an image that would be placed onto my layer panel. So let's just like quickly entertain this. Let's just place the Buddha. Or actually that's a raw image. So let's gonna place just because it would be a larger file size. Let's place something smaller. Yeah, let's just place this one. So I'm gonna place this bright walkway image over top of my layer 1. So I'm just gonna open that image. And once again, this is interesting. So we see a couple different things. We see this move box appear, right? Remember we talked about the move tool? But it also, because we had layer 1 activated, selected, when we went to go place that image, you'll notice that it appears beneath our layer 2, which is currently taking precedence over it. That sort of like misty archway is seen, but our layer 4 isn't. Just quickly as an aside, you can tell that a layer is active or you're on that layer when it's highlighted. It's highlighted when you see these like slightly thicker white gray bars that appear here, and sort of slightly different gray colors. So we know that this layer 4 right now is the layer that we're interacting with, right? Versus these sort of grayed out layers, which are the layers that we aren't currently working on. Anyway, so I'm just going to assume that this is fine and commit it. And we'll hide layer 2 to see our layer 4. There you go. So there's our Marrakesh looking layer underneath our layer 2. So that would be the interaction if I wanted to, in this case, add a layer via the navigator or the browse through to the specific file I'm looking for, which is, in this case, slightly different than the film strip. So when we have the film strip active, or what this indicates, this sort of bar of images indicates, is that we're operating within a folder that we've managed to. So meaning that we've sort of moved to that specific section on our we've navigated to a certain folder. It's maybe this is a subsection of our pictures folder, which it's like a landscapes folder or whatever. And so when we opened up one of our images, in this case that would have been this layer 1, right? Within that folder, then all of the other contents of that folder are displayed at the film strip. And this is purely just to provide a little bit of quality of life, like a fast way to sort of navigate between your files. Okay. So we've added a file as a layer. What's the second thing? Well, we've talked about it a little bit already. It's adding a blank layer. When you add a blank layer, do it. They're entered in as this sort of checkered layer, right? So we have all of these other layers hidden, meaning that the only one that's taking visual precedence right now is this blank layer 5. This checkered appearance means that this is a transparency. This layer has no visual pixel content in it. It is blank. So if I was to move this layer 5 above this layer 4 and activate layer 4, why would layer 4 be taking visual precedence over layer 5 in this case? And of course, the reason is that layer 5 contains no pixel information. It is completely transparent as a blank layer. So I would have to fill this layer with something. I would have to add something for it to take visual precedence. So as a quick aside from this, let's look at what that would be. you noticed earlier I just used the fill tool, which is this little bucket, to fill an entire layer with the color green. But if I wanted to add information visual, like this is really crude, right? We're going to add really crude visual information to layer 5. But we're just going to take the brush tool and we'll quite literally brush on green, right? So the brush tool just being the first in the fill section here. Now that I've actually added something to layer 5, the display, the sort of thumbnail here is indicating, oh, there's green information along with transparent information on our file. So when we start interacting with masks and momentarily, this information is going to be really useful because we're brushing, when we operate with masks, we're going to be brushing on information. But as an aside, this is just a transparency with like a single color, painted over top of it. That isn't that useful. That isn't going to be something we're commonly doing. I've maybe done this specific interaction a couple times using ACDSee. One of the interactions I can think of is, say I had an image of like a person who is writing at their desk and there's a sconce behind them or like a candle or something like that. And you wanted to make that candle give off a slightly brighter light. Well, what you could do is apply the color yellow as a sort of like a luminance around the candle and then apply a blend mode. Like in this case, the blend mode might be like, we can multiply as a blend mode. We could screen as a blend mode. There's all sorts of different blend modes that we're going to be talking about. But the way that you interact with these sort of different blend modes will change the effect that the color, in this case, on our layer 5 indicates over top of our layer 4. Lots of information there. But the point is blank layers can have information on them. In this case, that information is just the pixel color of green in the brushed on indicated areas. So the next button in our list, I'm just going to hide both of these two layers, right? The next button in our list is the ability to duplicate images, to duplicate layers. So my layer 1 here, right? I could simply click the duplicate button and it would add an exact copy, layer 1, copy 1 of that image. This is really useful. If we were talking about the filter menu, remember the filter menu is this aspect that I talked about right here, this guy. If we were going to be talking about that, which we're not going to today, but the point is all of these destructive changes now can become sort of pseudo non-destructive by copying layers. Again, I don't want to go into that too much because that's a whole different ballgame. That's a whole different aspect of it. But you can always copy layers. As just an aside, right? If we're going in and we're making edits to our images, it's nice to have an additional copy just placed as a standby. I remember years ago when I was working with Photoshop and I was in sort of college and we were talking about, good practices to get into when we're editing images. One of the practices that I was sort of told by my instructor, 8-9 years ago, was, hey, be in the habit of copying your layers. And the reason why is because it never leaves you with a destructive change. You can always just enter that. And so you don't lose too much if you go about doing that. So it's just a good way to, keep those practices in mind, but secondarily, you might actually have a specific reason why you've copied your image. That's how you do it. Okay, so I'm going to delete some layers, skipping ahead before we talk about masks. Deleting layers, super relevant, do it all the time. Jason, who asks, when will we talk about the filter menu? The filter menu, not in this video. I will talk about it in a future workshop. I'm going to talk about it using duplications to make non-destructive changes to your images. There's a lot going on in filter menu. There's certain things that you can do in filter menu that you can't do within using just general adjustment layers. But for the purpose of everything that we're going to be covering today, it's just too complicated to add. It adds too much to this video. So I will do my next workshop on filter menus. But just bear with me because there's so much going on in edit mode. The reason why I wanted to leave that section out is to just not complicate things too much. Cool. Thank you for asking that question, Jason. Okay, so, but we have a bunch of layers here. We've got our Marrakesh layer 4 with the camel. We've got a green layer we don't need. And we've got this layer 5 layer that's really awful that has the green smudge on it. We don't need these, right? I'm not using them. So I'm going to navigate just down to the bottom where it says delete layer, and it's going to do exactly what I'd imagine. It just removes it from our layer panel. So I'm just going to go through deleting these individual layers because we do not need them. The layers I'm going to be using are the layer 1 and the layer 2 to create sort of an image here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be talking about is we're going to talk about masking. Okay, so we talked about the layer tools. You know, masking is this little button that appears right next to duplicate. It says add layer mask. But before I do that, I want to quickly move this image because I think what the effect I'm trying to get is going to, if I just multiply this, or actually rather if I just reduce the opacity of this image so that if I reduce it to 50, which means in this case, display 50% of the pixels in layer 2. Well, by doing so, I see, you know, a bit of the layer 1 information. I see some pixels in that by reducing these. And if I do that, well, I kind of want my subject here, this woman in the yellow coat that I see in layer 1, pardon me, I want her to be more front and center. I don't want this sort of craggy, rocky looking thing to be so close to her. So I'm going to do this actually by flipping my image. Now, I'm just going to remind the people watching right now what I'm doing, right? Because what my plan is here, okay, I've got these two images. I'm going to combine them too, like these two images together, right? Edit mode is a layered editor. It's not, I'm not just making development changes to one image. I could do that in develop mode, right? Edit mode is a layered editor. It is stacking images on one another. It is combining those two. It's using masks and opacity to create really interesting compositions. That's what I'm doing. So if I want to do that, it's not gonna, like that composition is pretty not, it's not ideal. So let's just move this, right? Let's change the way this interacts. So I'm gonna let's multiply for now. Great, okay. I want to flip this. So I'm gonna go to my move tool. I'm going to really, really hone in on this. I want to make sure that it's as close as possible to the dimensions of the first image, but I don't want it to be, I don't want it to be too overbearing on that. And then I want to sort of flip it, meaning I want to take, if I take this section, right, and I move it over here, and I take the same section on the other side, and I move it over here, I can sort of work with that, even raise it up. So I'm sort of pretty happy with it right there. So I want to make sure that the focal point is still my character here, that is still my subject, but I want to sort of change how this sort of layer 2 interacts with my layer 1. The reason why I can see both right now is because I've applied this multiplication blend mode of all the blend modes here. I guess that's probably a pretty good time to talk about that. But before I do so, I'm just going to make sure that this layer is committed. So I'm going to commit it, and it's going to set it in place. It's perfect. So when we make blend changes or when we make opacity changes to an image, let's watch how that happens, right? So layer 2, I'm just going to change back to a normal blend mode, which means in this case, when I'm looking at it, I can tell that image is placed up to this point, and then I'm seeing my layer 1 underneath of it. If we look at the bounding box where this is placed, you can see that, there's a whole bunch of space here where there's actually no information, right? Well, on layer 2, that information, that space down here would be transparent, would be a transparency. And you notice that when you go and you look at your thumbnail, that's exactly what's being illustrated. It's quite small here, but it shows at the very bottom those checkered little boxes. That means that that is transparent. Okay, but not all of the information in this photo is transparent, right? Only the information at the bottom. So why is that? When we lower our opacity to 0 on this image, we're completely removing, we're seeing in this case 0% of the pixels from layer 2. If we raise it all the way to the top, we're seeing 100% of the pixels from layer 2. But like I said earlier, when it sits in the middle or you're sort of somewhere, 3/4 or, you see little bits of that, and that sort of combination of pixels illustrates, in this case, quite hazily where your image is. But this is really useful when you want, you want a really slight effects of one image over top of another image. We are combining images merely by the application of a reduction of opacity. For the purpose of this, we want to see this still fully, right? But we want to make some changes to this image. We want to see what's going on in this image. Blend modes are sort of functionally very similar to opacity, but there's like ways in which these change the interactions with your image. So for screen, for example, it's very, very bright. We're not seeing a lot of the background. We're just seeing it seems to me like it's almost like a film negative, Multiply becomes much darker, right? You see that the application of these two things together has a completely different effect on our image. So if you go through and you try out these different methods of blending, you're going to get very different effects as you move through. I personally work with a couple. I don't work with difference or subtractions that often. What I do work with are these. I work with color, which in the case of layer 2 is applying the colors of layer 2, right, to the luminosity of layer 1. I work with soft light often, which is just a generally like a nice. It's keeping in mind some of sort of the general information of the hills in the back, but it's a very light application. I work with hard light regularly. In fact, actually, we might use that one for this sort of composition that we're creating. And then I'll often use overlay, screen, and multiply. So play around with those. Again, there's very specific things that those are all those different blend modes are doing to images. And if I was better at vocalizing and understanding sort of post-processing and how light works, I could explain each and every single one of them to you, but I'm not. So I would just play around with them yourself and figure out how those work, The point is that those tools are at your sort of beck and call to utilize in order to sort of change the way light works between layers, right? Okay, so now we're getting into the point where we have to talk about masks because we want to mask elements of this image away, okay? So I'm going to select layer 2 and I'm going to apply a mask to layer 2 and we're going to work within that mask. So if I go down all the way down to the bottom here, we can add a layer mask. And you'll notice this little white box appears next to my layer 2. This white box contains a lot of information, so let's break it down. When we look at this white box, right, what this white box, this thumbnail, right, this mask here is illustrating is that the information that we see here, okay, is turned on. If I invert this mask to black, okay, so I set this mask black, that information then turns off. Bear with me. This is going to take a second to explain. But the interesting thing is, when we were talking about brushes earlier, right, okay, when we had a blank layer and we brushed on the color green, we added green to our layer, right? We added green in this one particular area of our layer. When you have a mask selected, how this interacts is very different than just adding color to a layer. Let's do the exact same thing, but instead of having the layer, look to my layer panel right now, just in the top right. Instead of having that selected, we have the mask selected, okay? Let's paint on the color white and see what changes. So I'm gonna go over to my brush tool, right? Just at the top left here. I'm gonna make sure that my foreground color, the color that I'm gonna be painting on, is set to white, okay? And I'm just gonna draw something on. Let's see what happens when I draw this area on. Oh, that reminds me of something. I wonder what I'm seeing right now, right? Okay, so when I paint on a mask using black and white to illustrate on and off, white being on, black being off, what do I see? I see the addition of the layer that I have masked. Okay? So right now, if I was to, again, if I was to sort of reverse this mask, right? If I was to turn this mask, the areas that I see white to black in this little thumbnail in the top right-hand corner, and the areas that I see black to white, what will occur? What will occur will be, if we were to look at our image, back to the center here, right? Well, I can tell you for now that this section of this image, where we just painted, right? This is gonna go back to displaying the sort of our layer one, this beach image. And this section, the section where all of this area is black, right? This is gonna display our sort of our archway, our beach archway. So let's just do this very quickly. I'm just gonna right click on my image and we're going to invert this mask. And I bet you that will be true, right? So now this image that we see is sort of inversion of that area. We see that sort of that layer one right here. We see the layer one in the sky. We see layer one down the bottom where there's this transparency. But all of the areas in this thumbnail right here on the right, which are white, are displaying now the contents of our layer two, right? They're displaying layer two is on, the areas where in our thumbnail which are black are off. So this gives us very, very, very clever, unique ways to apply certain images to things, right? This is like this completely changes the game, where I can draw on aspects of one image that I like and paint it over another image, right? So I can sort of like combine these two things. And back down at the bottom here where we technically had this transparency on layer two, well, I'm not even worried about that because that section of layer two is turned off. So we're gonna go in and we're gonna make adjustments to this, because this is pretty sloppy looking right now. We're gonna go in and change it as we go through. But that illustration of on and off, right, black and white, is what's important here. And I'm doing that. I'm interacting with these layers by using the brush tool and by using the black and white colors, right? Because as long as we have a mask selected, those are the only two colors we care about, we're painting on with black and white, right? On and off. We're turning the layers on and we're turning off in the areas that we've selected based on the pixel information that we're blending on. As an aside to this, what do you think will happen when, let's see here. Let's look at our thumbnails very quickly. So this layer two, the black section of this image, that's telling us there's no pixel information. This is being displayed as a transparency. This part of the image is off, right? Well, if I was to click layer one, go in and apply a layer mask, right? Just like layer two. And if I was to paint on black, right? So I'm gonna go up to the color picker and we're gonna reverse these and make my foreground color black, just like it is right now. And if I paint on black in the same area, well, I can bet you I'll see a transparency here. Because if we look to our layer panel, right? Let's do this. That black space, well, we know there's no information in that black space. We know there's no information in that black space right there. And this layer's hidden. This layer's turned off. So going down the order flow, right? No information there, no information there, no information there. Well, it's displayed transparency. So this is a very clear way to illustrate why layer order matters in addition to the use of masking, turning off and turning on parts, aspects, segments of layers. But I don't want this look because, again, that looks terrible. So I'm just going to remove the mask. Oh, I guess we haven't talked about this. So let's talk about this. When you have an active mask, this guy right here, this little square, you can always just click on the delete layer mask to completely remove it. And that will bring back, that it will display in full the original layer one. Okay. Yeah, so a couple other things we didn't really talk about. Okay. So we didn't talk about the brush itself. So we should talk about that. So the brush itself is the thing we have selected here. We have a couple relevant bars here. The relevant bars in this case are you can choose to apply a blend mode. You can choose the opacity of the brush itself. So if we were to have our layer 2 mask selected right in the top right hand corner here, and we were brushing on with black, that's what we want. And we want to reduce the opacity, okay? And let's just zoom in on our image here slightly. We also have control over the size of our physical brush. So by increasing the brush size, you see it gets way, way, way bigger. And by lowering the brush size, you'll see that circle in the middle gets way, way smaller. You may notice that there's these sort of dotted lines that appear on the outside, and those are simply just the feathering. So we can reduce the feathering. And what the feathering does is it applies a slight gradation of the change within the area. So I'm just going to reduce the size of our brush here. We're just going to go in and we're going to sort of just brush on a little bit more gently in the area that appears close to our wall here. You can also notice as you're brushing that one thing that comes up, which is kind of interesting, is if you brush something on, in this case we're brushing on, you can also reverse that by using the right mouse button. So we can sort of rebrush that area on by just clicking the right mouse button. Anyway, this is all sort of like fine tuning, but we're actually going to deal with this section in a later. We're going to sort of change the appearance of this and make this hyper accurate in a later section. So I'm just going to zoom out again, but that's just to illustrate how the sort of brush settings work. The color picker itself is something that comes up when you click on either the foreground or the background color. So if you were to select this black, say, it's going to bring up this little subsection, this little pop-up here that allows you to choose from a sort of a color wheel that also allows you the ability to enter specific hex codes if you know them, or set the values of your HSB and red, green, blue, which also gives the ability to sort of like, again, selectively choose using this sort of hyper accurate web display of colors. So again, if you just were cared about it, if you want to, you know, enter a specific color on a layer, right, you could do so. So that's how that interacts with. Another thing that we should be mindful of, right, when we've set a mask in place, is that masks have themselves a set of properties associated with them. When you've selected a mask, the properties comes up at the bottom. You'll notice if I select the sort of layer 2, this properties goes away, and when I select the mask, the properties come up. The properties are as such, the ability to apply a feathering, invert, very similar to how when we right-clicked and we inverted the mask from the sort of pop-up dialog box, you can also do quickly just by hitting the button just down at the bottom right-hand corner. By showing an overlay, it indicates which elements of your, in this case of your mask, are masked away. And then feathering increases the dispersion around the edge of your of the selection, or of the sort of, in this case, the mask. So if we increase this, you'll notice that the dispersion becomes like quite a bit more aggressive, especially in the section sort of right from our boot here. We can tell that that is, well, this is not an opacity. This feathering that we've applied has almost made it an opacity right there. I generally work with feathering turned off. I just generally don't like the appearance of feathering. I like to sort of be more accurate with but for certain things it works really well. So yeah, those are the sort of mask tools themselves. There's a couple other relevant things that you can do with masks. Again, I'm just going to set a quick mask on my layer 1. Let's take a look at some of our options here. So we have, you can set masks white, you can set masks black, similar to what we did earlier. So if you want to completely remove all the information within a mask, you want to turn it to a transparency, you'd set it black. If you wanted to show all of the information within your layer through the mask, you'd set it white. You can, like we said, invert mask, delete masks. We'll talk about pixel targeting later. And we'll definitely talk about copying and adding selections to masks shortly, but just things to keep note of. Yeah, and that's sort of it for general mask interaction. Let's sort of talk now about how adjustment layers work, how they change and add to an image. What do they add? So I have 3 layers here. I have layer 2 with my mask changes. And actually, let's go ahead and multiply this layer. There we go. We have layer 1, and we actually don't need this mask, so we'll just delete it. And then we have our hidden layer 1 copy. Let's add a sort of let's add a photo effect to the top of our layer here. Okay. Or actually, to illustrate this better, let's add a vibrance change, a hue change to our layer 2 here. So what I did there was I just clicked down on the vibrance tool, which sort of exists right at the top of the adjustment layers. It's right in the middle there, and it pops up on my layer panel right there. With it popped up, there's a couple buttons that come with it, come next to it. You'll notice that right off the bat, our adjustment layer already comes preset with a mask. Great. We can paint black or white on this mask or whatever to change the appearance of it whenever we want. Let's crank the hue to a completely different color so we can just see how it impacts our image. Okay. So things are different now. Reds are green, yellows are bluish colors. Like our hue is dramatically different, okay? Our vibrance change, again, to illustrate order and how it matters, right? Our vibrance change is at the very top of our image layer, which means by state that this vibrance change is applied to all of the layers beneath it. Now, if I want to move this layer, beneath layer 2 and above layer 1, the vibrance change doesn't affect the layer 2. You'll notice that that sort of normal colored stone is back. It's only affecting like her jacket, the background, the areas of the image that are not masked, right? By process 2, if I was to move this beneath layer 1, I wouldn't see it at all, right? Because now vibrance is affecting nothing, right? It's affecting our hidden layer 1 and nothing beneath it. One of the things that's kind of neat about adjustment layers is that you have the ability to clip them to specific layers. This overrides slightly the way order matters. Clipping is this diamond button that appears right to the left of the vibrance layer. When I clip vibrance, right, It means it's sending that information just to the layer that appears beneath it, okay? So vibrance has been clipped to layer 2. It's not displaying it. It's not displaying vibrance in the areas that we've masked away. It is instead just displaying this hue vibrance change to the areas that are just white in layer 2. But you'll also notice that it's not displaying it on layer 1. Her red jacket's back, the color of the water looks normal again. It's normal, right? So clipping sets vibrance just to the layer that appears beneath it. Again, if I was to unclip this layer, it would affect everything. It would affect my whole screen, okay? So we notice here, yeah, that's definitely, as that vibrance has been applied, the rocks have changed to this sort of unnatural blue-like color again, you know? That has been changed, right? So clipping sort of overrides that order slightly, right? So it's just something to be mindful of. It's a really useful tool if you want to just apply it to one thing. Obviously, we can also hide any adjustment layers. That eye is still there. So by clicking it off, we turn it off. One of the things to note as well is by clicking on the mask, it brings up the mask properties. Very similar to how when we clicked on the mask button in our layer 2, it brought up the mask properties. So if you ever find yourself like, oh, where did my vibrance tools go? How can't I edit why can't I edit my vibrant, why can't I change the hue again? Well, you would just click on the settings button that appears on the icon to the left of it, and that will bring up this bar, this sort of vibrance settings again. Keeping in mind that because vibrancies or adjustment layers are layers, they are subject to all the rules that layers are, in that you can change the opacity, you can change the blend mode, yada, 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 right? You have all the options to all of these things as well. Like I said with vibrance, if I wanted to, I wanted to have this kind of eerie blue on everything, but I don't want her jacket to be blue, then I could change that very quickly, right? So it's very simple to go about doing that. So that's how adjustment layers work. But I don't like this vibrance change. This hue is kind of a weird color, so I'm just going to remove it. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a slight levels change. So I'm going to go add a levels change. I'm not going to clip this to anything because I want it to affect all of the layers that I see. I'm going to slightly increase the midtones and slightly reduce the highlights. And then on top of this as well, I'd also like to apply a photo effect, which appears just to the bottom left of the adjustment layers, which I'm going to add, I believe, a process lighting effect. And I'm going to dramatically reduce the opacity in this because it's really aggressive. And I'll just, if I wanted to preview what it looked like before and after, I can. Okay, so let's just quickly go over what the adjustments are, just so you're aware. Again, all of these adjustments you'll be very familiar with if you've explored the filter menu at all, because lots of them are available there. So things like, what do we have here? Exposure and lighting levels, all of these things are going to pop up in a similar way. So just as an aside, we have exposure, levels, curves, light EQ, white balance, vibrance, color EQ, excuse me, RGB, split toning. We have the ability to add color. We have black and white. We've got negatives. We've got photo effect like we just used. We have skin tune, sharpening, blurring, noise reduction or noise addition, clarity, dehaze, gradient mapping, vignetting, posterizing, threshold, and the addition to add color LUTs. So tons of effects within there. So all of these things, like I said, totally subject to the same rules as layers, so you can just go absolutely crazy with them. Okay, so we talked about clipping. We talked about physically opening the adjustment tools after you've sort of changed them around and you're working within mask effects. I've talked briefly about opacity and blending. So now I want to get down to the sort of nitty-gritty of this mode. And let's make a more accurate selection of the edge of this this rock face, right? Because we talked about, you know, how we could brush it on. Well, there's a couple different ways that we can sort of get way more accurate with that. And one of which is just using this tool that we like to call luminosity selection. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to collect our layer 2 here, and I'm going to make a duplication of the layer. So I'm going to click duplicate layer just down the bottom. I want it to be at the very top, and I do not want this mask anymore. I want that mask removed. So let's delete that layer mask. So what I should be seeing is our layer 2 copy 1 at the very top, and I'm going to apply a normal blend mode to it. Nice. All I want to see is that. And then the photo effect levels, layer 2, layer 1, and the hidden layer 1 just beneath it. Okay. So before we talked about, you know, roughly brushing on, right? Like where the edge of this sort of craggy rock face kind of is. But I want to be super precise about that selection. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use the sort of luminosity selection tool to get a much better selection. So sort of now we're going to take a little slight deviation away from the layers panel, although this will include layers momentarily, and just navigate up to the select panel. And I'm going to select luminosity selection. And what that's going to do is it's going to make a selection of all of the light sort of on a tonal level within this image, and it's going to sort of have it actively selected, which is what this red means. Let's talk about selections. Selections are displayed a couple different ways in ACDSee. The default, by my understanding, is a method called marching ants, which many of you will be familiar with. Marching ants is just like a little dotted line that sort of looks like it's actively moving. And it's sort of, marching ants will be displayed on the edge of what you are selecting. I hate this method. It's one of my least favorite methods of selection. So I almost always use selection highlighted, and I set my selection highlighted to a specific color. For the purpose of this, this video, let's actually just change the color so you can see what this does. But I always use selection highlighted, and I always set it to slightly lower opacity than the actual, so we can see what's being affected. So selection highlighted is a selection method in this case that displays what information you want to see, or what is selected. So how you got there again was select and overlay options, but we were making a luminosity selection. And how? But in the case, remember how we talked about, you know, it wasn't so much that we wanted to select this white area. Actually, what we wanted to do was select the reverse of that, to select this sort of crumbling rock face that appears as sort of like almost like a portcullis around where our subject was right here. So what I'll do is, now that I've made a luminosity selection, right? That's what I wanted. I want to inverse that. I want to select the inverse of that. So let's do that. Let's go over to select, and let's inverse our selection. Boom. Beautiful. So the exact opposite is selected within this image, right? We've all of this sort of area that appears its natural color, it's white, it's sort of this grayed out area, is not being selected. What is being selected is this this sort of this pink area. And so I mentioned earlier, you know, like, how does this affect masking? How does this change masking? Masking and selections are always related, because what I can do right here is, now that I've made this selection is active, I can navigate over to my layer 2, right? And I can just click the mask button down at the very bottom, and boom. Now my selection is very different. Let's just deselect for a moment. You can deselect by going deselect, or you can just use the hotkey Alt-D. This selection, right? Okay, this selection that we've made of the outside area here, it's pretty different than the one we made before, right? Let's compare the two. I'm going to turn all of this information off. This was our original. Now our original is, let's also unmultiply this so we can tell the difference. Well, like, look, there's all this area right here with this sort of poor, you know, like this is just basically from a poor brush selection, right? That we did with the mask. Well, this one was automated rather, and let's see here. Oop. What went wrong there? There we go. And this one is hyper specific. It's right on the edge of this. So it's a really, really nice selection, one we can work with, right? And we are going to work with this momentarily. But I just wanted to illustrate that there was two different methods to getting that selection, two different methods to making that mask. So if we were to now look at our thumbnail, right? Look at our thumbnail. Our thumbnail illustrates on and off, but in such greater clarity than that of my, you know, crudely drawn one, right? So you can tell that there's like little speckling on the rock that wasn't selected. The rock itself wasn't selected, or sorry, the white space in the center wasn't selected. And all of this particulate gray area that appears sort of green down the bottom, that was very muted as well. So that was a much better selection. Let's make a different selection method, because now we've talked about luminosity selections. Again, just going up to the select panel and making a luminosity selection from there. Let's once again, let's do this. Let's duplicate our layer 2. So Tom asks, there seems to be a line running through the rock from the background image. A line running through the rock. Can that be removed or not? Oh, there seems to be a bit of a display error right here. Yeah, because you see the line you're referring to right here. 1 second. Yeah, what's going on here? That definitely appears to be a display error. Let's apply to normal. Let's apply to layers. Oh, you know what? I wonder if I move this beneath there. Yeah, Tom, to answer that question, I think that might just be a bug. There was just definitely a weird display error that does not appear to have any rhyme or reason to it, and it seems to only show up sometimes. So I'm guessing that's either a bug or it's my own system just operating really unsmoothly. So anyway, I'm going to proceed. But yeah, thanks for that comment. I'm not sure what it is either. Now that we have our layer 2 placed, right? Like that was one way of making a selection, was luminosity selection. One was just using the brush tool, but we haven't actually talked about using there we go. We haven't also talked about just making a selection with the brush tool itself, with the brush selection tool. So we've talked about the move tools, with specifically move right here. We've talked about sort of the brush tools, which appear in here, along with sort of like masking and color selection tools. Let's sort of illuminate a little bit more of what's going on the toolbar, because there's going to be a couple things that we're not talking about. So we have move tools, selection tools, which goes to here. Then we have shape tools, which go to here. Those sort of brush and sort of fill tools, which exist here. And then we have this filter panel. This filter panel is actually identical to the one that we could open up here. Absolutely identical. The difference in this case, though, is we wanted to also place it up here so people could access, say, like they wanted to access like color balance or something like that. But just also have the real estate that, you know, you could have more real estate by using these icons up at the top. So just think of these as sort of like an addition of the filter menu just up at the top toolbar. And then lastly, actions, which I wanted to cover today, but we've covered it in depth in other videos, and I do believe this is going to be a longer video, so I think we'll leave it out. We'll talk about it in the filter menu video that I'm going to do next. So yeah, But the next thing that we have to talk about is the different selection methods. There are a variety of different selection methods. You know, there's the polygonal selection, which just allows you to make any click selections, right? I simply just made a shape. You have the ability to make, you know, square selections, right? You have the ability to make, obviously, circle selections. And then you also have the ability to make sort of custom lasso shape selections. And then finally, you also have the magic wand brush that, similar to how luminosity selection works, allows you to sort of select specific light, different sort of tonal based selections. I don't use these as much. I have a tendency to just sort of stick with smart brushing. Smart brushing is a selection method. Again, this is how we can interact with this tool when it comes to the layer panel. We can change sort of, we can make, you know, specific mask adjustments using selections. Smart brushing is really neat. So smart brushing is the first that's indicated on our panel there. And smart brushing comes with the ability to turn it obviously off. By turning it off, it just makes you're making a general selection of where you brushed on, similar to how you're brushing with the general brush. Smart brushing also allows you to be pixel aware and make selections based on color, brightness, and a combination of color and brightness, which is called magic. For the purpose of this video, let's select magic with our tolerance absolutely cranked. And we'll make our nub size a bit smaller. But if I select here, right, you'll see that my selection is super precise when it comes to the edge of this rock face. So when you're using brush selections, you know, even if you screw up and you go slightly over, right, you can just right click to unselect that portion. So when you use the magic brush tool in ACDSee, you can make really specific selections of certain areas using this brush tool. So this is obviously a really effective, cool thing you can do within the software. As an aside, you know, like I said, if I wanted to mask this image now based on the selection, very similar to how we did with luminosity selection, I would just click the add a layer mask, right? Because like when we've painted on this pink color here, this is just saying like, hey, Adam, this is your active selection. What do you want to do with it now that you have it? And I could go like, well, actually, you know, I want to make a mask with that selection. Or maybe what I want to do is I want to make a adjustment layer change to that area. For example, I could, let's do something really egregious, like a light EQ change. If I click this light EQ button, look at what happens. That section of that rock face that I've selected has a light EQ mask. So if I wanted to absolutely crank that section of that rock face using light EQ, I did so really effectively and only in that area using the smart brushing tool. Okay, so that's how we got that effect, and we can apply these things at any point. Curiously, also, you can copy masks. So like if I wanted to take this mask, I'm like, oh, I really like this one selection of the rock face, but I actually don't want a light EQ change. I want something else. So I right click on that and I go copy. I'm copying the mask that I have selected, copy, right? And maybe I want to do, let's just hide this. Maybe what I wanted to do was I wanted to egregiously sharpen that area instead. Well, now I've got a sharpening adjustment layer that exists right there. I'm going to paste as a mask onto our sharpen panel. And then now I have, you know, that sharpen affecting, you know, just in that area. So look at how much this area has been sharpened, you know, versus the other areas of this rock. So you can copy, right? Copy and paste as masks onto other masks. Also, Once you have a mask, you have a selection. They work, you know, vice versa. So I'm just going to delete these because I think this is getting a bit complicated now. Let's get rid of some of these layers. Very unusual that it's doing that. Anyway, now that I have a selection, you know, made, right? I can also add, you know, I can add a selection from a mask. So if I wanted to, you know, let's see here. Make a duplicate of this, remove this guy, oops. Deselect. Pardon me. Sorry, I'm just running into a technical issue here. Let's do this. There we go. So if I had made a very simple luminosity selection here, and let's say, let's inversed it. There we go. And made a curves change. I would be able to select, add, make mask. How do I make the mask? Oh, why is that? Okay, disregard that for now. Okay, so what I was attempting to, I don't believe my my system is giving me an easy time here. What I was attempting to do was, when we have a selection in this case, right? Or sorry, when we have a mask in this case, you can right-click on the mask you have itself, and then just or add that that mask to your selection. So what it does is, I mean, we've talked about making selections and then adding masks for them, but the reverse is also true. So if you ever have one of these active, you know, sort of masks like we do in this image, right? Like this mask here, enables you to just quickly select that area. So, you know, and to do vice versa. Anyway, so, but we have our image here, we have our mask. You know, we've talked about a couple different things with luminosity selection. We've talked about sort of, you know, different masking methods, right? I just want to quickly clean up this image because obviously there's this bold line that appears down at the bottom here, which I don't particularly like. And then I want to show, you know, like a subtle tweak that we can do with pixel targeting. But so the first thing I want to do is just down at the base of this image right here, right? I want to select my mask, and I want to make sure I'm operating with a black brush, right? I'm just going to brush on to hide some of these elements with a bigger brush here. Just want to merge a couple of these sections, just using a sort of nice feathering change. There we go. And I want to also paint on with white in some of the areas that I'm concerned it's, you know, it's a bit too transparent, like right there and right there. So I'm just gonna increase my feathering once again and sort of just move up through this area. And this is just fine tweaking the areas that I kind of want to display in a little bit more prominence on the outside of this image, right? The other thing I want to do is I want to select my subject here, right? My subject being the woman, and I want to make a pixel targeting. I want to change the color of her, say like her vest or whatever. Well, to do so, I would simply click my layer that I want to work with, right? And I would navigate over to the pixel targeting section right here. And it brings up this, this sort of panel, and it indicates, I mean, in this case, this pink indication being all of the elements are currently being selected. So if I was to simply okay this, I would, all of my, whatever I saved would affect this whole image. But I don't want that. I just actually want it merely on the red coat here, right? So how pixel targeting works is it has all these different tone bars and color bars. Well, because I'm working with color, I only need to select a very specific color, and that in this case, it's actually that red, right? So if I was to max out all these bars, right, it would be selecting all the colors. And that's, in this case, why we are seeing a selection of the whole space. But if I'm going to slowly bring these colors to the bottom, you'll see that now this changes pretty dramatically. So if I'm slowly sort of reducing these colors to 0, less and less of my image is being selected. Keeping in mind that my, my selection color is still that sort of pink color. So now, well, okay, I'm just selecting red. Well, this is good because I just want to select that coat. But there's also some red areas in and around the rest of our image, but we can work with that. This is going to be a really accurate selection. So I'm just going to raise until I can see most of her jacket. And that's just picking up the other areas. Okay, so this is as good as I can get. And you'll notice in that my target mask is sort of replicating, in this case, what you see in the center here. It's just saying, hey, that white area? Well, that's what's being selected. Do you see those gray areas? Those are being lightly selected. All of the black area there, not being selected at all. So we'll hit OK based on that information, and then that has made my selection. Now, what I can do is, in order to change just this coat, I can navigate over to the vibrancy adjustment. Now remember, this pink, this active selection is active. It's saying, hey, Adam, what do you want to do with this selection? Well, I would select vibrance. And then now if I was to change these values, it would keep in mind the mask that I have there. So if I wanted to change her coat, I could go about sliding that over. Maybe we want to change her coat to like a green color or something like that and reduce the saturation slightly. Or actually, increase the vibrance, reduce. Try to get a kind of, there we go, turquoisey color. So, but the other thing too is we noticed that when we went to go select that, make a pixel selection based on that red color, it was pretty darn good, but we could also just erase some of these other areas that we know that it's being selected down here. There's a couple red elements. So we just go through and sort of black out those areas. It's going to affect the thumbnail that we see here. Also can do that slightly over here. I just want to make sure that I don't touch any of the green coat that I just changed. And then if we zoom in, we can see pretty closely too that slightly it was a little bit missed just on the edge of the jacket there. So I can go in and I can fix that pretty easily. I just pop in with the reverse color being white. And just fix that area very subtly. Anything that we don't like within this space. And then back out of that. Now, if we were to, again, let's select our different layers here. Apply some changes, well, we can see, I mean, obviously there'd be a secondary issue in that we want to make that pixel targeting change also to the water there, or underneath the water, just so we don't have a contradiction in our image. There we go. But that application has been, selected there, and now we're seeing that vibrancy change. Now, keeping in mind too that obviously I could go in and I could, make every single spot of that and really fix up that jacket so that all of the red areas are displayed as turquoise. But you get the gist of that information. So we've discovered, working with pixel targeting to target specific colors of our area, our colors of our image. We've used luminosity selection to make like really, really, really specific selections. We've also indicated that you can make selections with the brush selection tool using the sort of the magic selection there. And all, like I said, all of these selection methods have sort of a reverse application in the way that they work with masking. So as soon as we made a selection, we can make a mask. As soon as we have made a mask, we can make a selection. They work, like, and obviously, there's things where we can go in and we can tweak other elements of our image here. But like, as far as, from the very beginning of our image to the very ending, they're like, that is a composition. Now you've got two layers on top of one another. They're very different than the original, Anyway, so you can go through and you can make sort of images and work with this and create compositions that wouldn't otherwise be possible in something as simple as like develop mode, right? Where you're just in there to edit raw files. In edit mode, now you're in here to make like actual creations. You're here to make, like compositional graphics in here. So it is a wholly different mode in that respect. That is going to conclude the edit mode video. That one ran just a bit over an hour. I wanted to talk today also, like I said, I kind of wanted to pare down this video a little bit, right? Because there's a lot more we could talk about. We could talk about the filter menus. I didn't even get the chance to talk about actions. There's more invested in here too. We could spend more time talking about the brush selection tool. There's a lot more involved. But this, in its essence, will provide you a lot of the structure to understanding how to make compositions in edit mode. The big thing is like understanding where to place layers, how to place them, how to move them, like layer order. It matters, working with masks in a really fundamentally interesting way. These are the aspects that make edit mode. These are sort of the beginning fundamentals to using this mode. So there was so little questions this time. I think I answered like 4 questions. So I'm going to stick around for a bit. I would love to answer some questions. Yeah, and just, like I said, if there is something I have an answer for, send me an email. Like I'm here to help. But I guess people got a lot out of it just because it was yes. So a couple questions. Thanks. Lots to learn. Looking forward to more of these webinars. Thank you, Jill. I appreciate you stopping by. There's always going to be more webinars. They're generally on a Wednesday at the sort of beginning or end of a month. The new one I will schedule today. Let's just say for the time being, it will be on, let's do March 13th. That's going to be the next one. And we'll talk about what we missed today. Keeping in mind, I'll also upload these on our YouTube as soon as I can. Jerry said, can ACDSee be accessed from Lightroom? No, but you can, we have a program, or we have an ability to add, add external editors within manage mode, which enables you to add any other software, Lightroom, On1, whatever you're using, to ACDSee. So manage within ACDSee, maybe you do a development change in ACDSee and then you open up your image within a different editor. So external editors, it's something that we covered in the manage video, which I'll upload to YouTube. Okay, so talk about the filter menu on next workshop. For all of you wanting to look at the YouTube, it's this one. And also you can email me here. So that information. At the beginning, you mentioned you had a YouTube channel. Can you please provide the link? There you go. Boyd asked, use layers to create a line drawing. I mean, I'm sure you can. I'm not really sure what you mean by line drawing, but clarify out however you'd like. Yeah, was this video helpful to you? Did you get anything out of it? If so, please let me know, or send me an email as well. That's always good to have. If you are somebody where like you'd really like to see a specific aspect of the software be represented, that maybe it's not in the software right now, or you want to see a certain feature, please let us know. I literally send all of those emails to our developers. And man, is it ever helpful for those guys. They love to see people excited about features that may not be in the product or might be in a competitor's product or something like that. So yeah. So anyway, just a recap of what we talked about today. So I just drew attention to the sections that we covered. We talked about the main purpose of this video is to just understand layers. So we talked about the layer panel. We talked about layer tools. We talked about brushing and masks. We talked about adjustment layers. We briefly covered pixel targeting and luminosity selection, in addition to just making selections using the brush selection tool. Yeah. Tom said, I stopped taking notes at the last 15 minutes. Can you repeat the last hour? Yeah, I'll repeat the last hour on YouTube. There is a special effects pencil drawing selection, but it performs poorly. I'm looking for a better way. Oh, meaning it's like, yeah, a special effect. Well, I'm wondering if the special effects are a filter. So that will be something we're going to cover in the next video. I don't believe it's under the photo effects thing itself, actually. Yeah, it isn't. Okay. David, thank you for coming in. Boyd, I don't have an answer for you, but if you are having issues with a specific aspect of the software, I know that there is a special effect pencil drawing tool, but it's within the filter menu. But if that's the one you're taking issue with, send me an email. I'll send it to our developers and we'll sort it out. Tom asked, how will we find when the next one is scheduled? Will we get an email? Yes, please go to our workshop page and sign up for a workshop. If you've ever signed up for a newsletter, like you're gonna get a workshop email. But why don't I find that page for you so you can see it? But yeah, we have a workshop page. So I think what it asks you to do on this page is to just sign up for our emails. But if you're ever curious when our next workshop will be, it is on this page right here. So there's a bit more information about the workshop. So yeah, just again, a bit of apologies. I definitely had encountered a bit of a layer issue there in the video. Definitely not something I could do anything about. It seemed to be just a display error. But yeah, so sorry about that. But you know, these things come up every once in a while. So yeah. Anyway, I think I'm gonna take off. Let's see here. Terry, yes, I am constantly trying to slow down. It's a tough thing too, because I find that I know the software and I've known it for a couple years, and I'm still just trying to pace myself a bit more. But you're glad you're not in one of my earlier workshops where I was like, I was going a mile a minute. But yes, I will work on that. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Jason asked, not related to today's topic, recently purchased 2019 software, and after editing a photo in developer mode and saving it, the image looked different than what it looked like when I edited it. Huh. Jason, I want you to email me about that. That is interesting. I don't think you're doing anything wrong, though. Just to reiterate, here's my email. Harry, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's definitely a developer question, so I'm going to forward that to them. But I want you to email me about that because that's, yeah, that's very specific. So anyway, that is it for today's workshop. I wanted to thank everyone for stopping by and checking it out. Like I said, if you have any questions, email me. Yeah, and this will be available on our YouTube channel soon. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your Wednesday or Thursday, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much.